They fired me in front of 200 people, mid-sentence, no less. One moment I was presenting the quarterly systems roadmap, the next the VP of Operations stormed onto the stage with 2 security guards flanking him like he was unveiling a new product instead of humiliating an employee. Effective immediately, he announced into my microphone, "Your services are no longer required." A murmur rippled through the auditorium, confusion, discomfort, a few awkward attempts at clapping that died halfway. I stood there with my clicker in hand, the projector still glowing behind me with a slide titled System Resiliency Improvements. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so stupid. I didn't argue. Didn't ask why. Didn't even blink. I just set the clicker down, wished the audience a good afternoon, and walked off stage while the VP pretended he had just done something bold and visionary instead of something reckless and profoundly ignorant. People whispered as I passed. Some stepped aside. Some didn't know where to look. A few mouthed "I'm sorry." All of them knew, everyone knew, that I had personally designed, patched, stabilized, migrated, and resurrected the company's production system more times than leadership could count. They also knew the VP hated that I didn't play politics, didn't praise him, and didn't pretend he understood anything about infrastructure. And now, in his moment of victory, he finally got to flex that power. He had no idea what he'd just done. Because the system humming quietly behind the company's entire global operation, the system keeping deliveries routed, warehouses synced, customer orders flowing, billing accurate, and inventory alive, ran on a complex lattice of scripts, dependencies, and monitors that I alone fully understood. Not because I hoarded knowledge, but because no one else wanted to learn. They were happy letting the wizard in the basement handle it all. The wizard they had just fired. Publicly. Dramatically. Stupidly. I didn't sabotage anything. I had no need to. I'm a professional. But I did know one thing they didn't. The presentation I'd been delivering before being yanked off stage wasn't just about resiliency. It contained a very specific warning, one I hadn't gotten to yet. And that warning had a timestamp. The moment I walked out of the building, the countdown was already ticking. They fired me in front of 200 people. Not in a private meeting, not in an HR office, not even with the courtesy of a written notice. No, my boss, Victor Hale, the kind of executive whose ego needed its own parking space, decided to make an example out of me during the quarterly all-hands. One minute I was presenting the new load balancing architecture that would save the company 7 figures a year. The next, he was interrupting my slide deck to say, "And this right here, is what not to do." Effective immediately, Marcus is no longer with the company. 200 faces turned toward me. Some shocked. Some pretending not to care. Some relieved it wasn't them. I walked off stage with my pulse pounding in my ears and a strange, icy calm settling over me. They thought they were humiliating me. They didn't know I was the one who built the system they were now so proud of showcasing. And they definitely didn't know what would happen once my access was revoked. The next morning, at exactly 9:15 a.m., the failure began quietly. A few alerts. A few stalled processes. Nothing alarming, at first. The operations team thought it was routine load jitter and brushed it off. But the load balancer I'd architected wasn't just any piece of infrastructure. It was a mesh of daisy-chained services, orchestration scripts, and task queues, brilliant when maintained properly, catastrophic when the wrong person yanked out one piece without understanding its dependencies. My badge had been disabled. My credentials wiped. My service tokens invalidated. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that Victor, in his smug self-importance, thought he could clean up the system by removing me as an owner on core pipelines. And when he did, he unknowingly tripped the failsafe I had designed after a near breach 3 years ago, a failsafe that required manual verification by an architect who no longer existed in their database. The system didn't know I'd been fired. It only knew that its chain of trust had been broken. At 10:03 a.m., the entire East Region cluster went dark. Not degraded. Not slow. Dark. Every warehouse, every distribution node, every logistics partner that relied on our live routing API suddenly lost visibility. Deliveries halted mid-route. Carrier integrations started throwing 500 errors like confetti. Internally, Slack lit up with panicked messages, screenshots of dashboards bleeding red, frantic pleas for engineers, escalating pings to Victor that went unanswered because he was in a meeting with board members, bragging about decisive personnel decisions. By 10:42, the outage spread to the central region. Then the west. The system tried to reroute traffic automatically, but without the architect-level signature, the one only I could provide, it simply locked itself, believing it was under coordinated attack. That was how I designed it, better to shut down than let a breach propagate. Ironically, they caused the very thing the system was built to prevent. Meanwhile, I sat at a coffee shop 2 blocks away, sipping an espresso and watching the chaos unfold on public status pages. I wasn't interfering. I wasn't hacking anything. I wasn't touching a single line of code. I didn't need to. They had flipped the wrong switch all on their own. My phone buzzed relentlessly, unknown numbers, HR, even a few coworkers begging for help. I let them go to voicemail. After the public trading alert, after the press started calling, after the emergency board meeting was announced, I finally received a text from Victor himself. "We need you. Name your terms." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the first smile of the day tug at my face. They had fired me in front of 200 people. They could ask for my help in front of the board. By noon, the company was bleeding millions per hour. Contracts were violating SLA thresholds. Clients were talking legal action. The CFO had reportedly yelled loud enough that someone in the hallway recorded it. And Victor, arrogant, performative, overly confident Victor, was forced to explain that the system failure was directly tied to actions he had taken without consulting the architecture team. The board was not amused. I heard later that one of them actually asked, "Why would you fire the person who built the system during the meeting where he was presenting how it works?" Victor had no good answer. I walked back into the building at 1:30, not as an employee, but as a consultant. Triple my old rate. Full autonomy. Direct reporting to the COO, bypassing Victor entirely. The same 200 people who watched me get fired watched me badge in with a visitor pass and walk past their stunned faces toward the crisis room. Victor avoided eye contact. I didn't bother offering him any. It took me exactly 47 minutes to restore the network, validate the trust chain, and rebuild the orchestration keys. By the time the system was fully operational again, the board had already decided Victor's fate. He was escorted out quietly. No audience. No speech. No humiliation broadcast to the company. I didn't need revenge. The system had simply told the truth. They fired me in front of 200 people. The system shut down. And in the end, only one of us walked back through those doors by choice. The next 40 seconds were the longest of my career. People always imagine mass firings as dramatic, screaming, begging, chaos. But this was silent. 200 employees sat frozen, hands hovering over keyboards, watching systems they depended on every day turn into unresponsive gray windows. A few tried refreshing, logging out, even rebooting. Nothing helped. The director of engineering was already sweating through his shirt, barking orders into a headset that wasn't connected to anything useful. The CEO stormed back into the room, her heels hammering the floor like she wanted to crack it open. "What did you do?" she demanded, as if the volume of her voice would magically bring the servers back. I didn't answer. She wasn't talking to me, she was talking at me, the way she always had. The project managers tried to form a protective wall between us, but she pushed through them. You think this is funny? You think sabotaging the company is some kind of revenge? I looked her dead in the eyes. If I had sabotaged anything, you wouldn't be able to turn the lights on in this building. What you're dealing with is the natural consequence of firing the only person who knows how your systems interact. That struck something in her, fear. Not anger. Real fear. Her breathing stuttered. Her posture buckled. For the first time since she arrived 6 months ago with her buzzwords and arrogance and threats, she realized she was in way over her head. She grabbed my arm. Fix it. Please. Name your price. The room fell silent again. A few people gasped. A director whispered, "Holy hell." I calmly pulled my arm away. I could fix it. In about 5 minutes. I paused. But you fired me. In front of 200 people. Remember? Her voice cracked. Then, unfire you. Whatever. Just fix this. I would. But your HR already processed my separation. My credentials have been invalidated. And as a non-employee, I legally cannot touch your systems without creating a liability nightmare for your board. Her face collapsed. But don't worry, I added, picking up my box of personal items. You can explain all of this to the federal auditors when they come asking why your compliance servers went offline mid-quarter. Gasps echoed across the floor. I walked toward the exit as the CEO scrambled behind me, begging now, actually begging, but I didn't turn around. Not once. When I reached the doors, 24 employees stood, forming a quiet honor guard. Some nodded. Some whispered thanks. A few had tears in their eyes. They knew what the shutdown meant. They knew the CEO wasn't surviving this. As I stepped outside into the sunlight, my phone buzzed. A message from the chairman of the board. We need to talk. Immediately. I smiled. Sometimes you don't need revenge. Sometimes you just need people to reveal the consequences of their own incompetence. The applause was still echoing through the auditorium when the lights flickered, soft at first, like a warning cough. I was standing backstage, invisible to the same 200 employees who'd just watched my boss fire me like I was some inconvenience he needed to clear before lunch. 2 hours earlier, I'd been the lead systems architect, the one who kept our notoriously fragile infrastructure held together with code, caffeine, and the kind of institutional knowledge you don't put in documentation because if you did, leadership would decide you're replaceable. But the CEO wanted a show. He wanted to look decisive in front of the investors visiting the office. So he marched me on stage mid-presentation and announced that underperformers must go. Underperformer. The man who didn't know the difference between uptime and throughput had called me that. So when the lights dimmed, I stepped into the doorway just out of the audience's sight line. I slipped my backpack off my shoulder and checked the silent notification on my phone. Right on time. My boss was still on stage, sweating under the hot lights as he tried to continue the product demo like nothing was wrong. He kept tapping his clicker, but the slides wouldn't advance. The massive 40-foot main display flashed once, then switched to the default admin console. The audience murmured. He clicked again. And again. Nothing. Then the second screen died. The third. The giant LED wall behind him blinked twice, then went completely black. He turned, confused, and tapped the mic. It cut out. Then the speakers. Then every light on the stage. A wave of whispers rolled through the auditorium, uncertainty, confusion, the sweet sound of controlled panic building. Perfect. Because the truth was simple, when they fired me, they also revoked the only admin credentials capable of keeping their patchworked infrastructure stable during a full system load, like, say, during a 200-person investor demonstration. The system didn't crash. It simply stopped being babysat. And a system neglected is a system that remembers who held it together. My boss leaned into the darkness, trying to see the crowd. We're experiencing a minor, technical hiccup," a laugh snorted from the audience. Someone else groaned. An investor said loudly, "Is this a joke?" I checked the next notification. Security protocol, revert to last stable configuration, ***, that last stable configuration? Me. My systems. My credentials. Anything else was considered unsafe. And right now, the CEO was being told exactly that by a frantic AV tech whispering up on stage. I watched him pale. I watched the realization hit: to get the system back, he'd have to reinstate the one person he just humiliated on stage. I smiled. Still hidden in the doorway, I waited for the final message, the one triggered automatically when the system ran its emergency diagnostic and found no qualified admin left. Administration locked. Authorization required, original system owner. It popped up on his screen. I saw his eyes widen. He looked out at the crowd, sweating, choking on embarrassment. Then slowly, so slowly it almost looked painful, he scanned the room until he found me. Even in the dark, he knew. He understood. He mouthed the words, "Please." I didn't move. I didn't blink. He fired me in front of 200 people. Now he could ask me to save him in front of them too. I stepped forward just enough for him to see me shake my head. Not today. And the system remained dark. The silence after my termination lingered for only a breath before the room erupted into awkward murmurs and the scraping of chairs. 200 pairs of eyes followed me as I walked off that stage, some smug, some sympathetic, most terrified that they might be next. I didn't give them a show. No shouting, no pleading, no dramatic exit. Just a calm smile and a nod. That, more than anything, unsettled them. Because the people who smile when they're fired are either unhinged, or holding cards no one else knows about. I walked straight past HR, past security, and out of the building without a word. They thought I was humiliated. They thought I had been blindsided by the sudden decision, announced publicly, of course, to make an example of me. They thought taking away my badge meant taking away my access. They truly didn't understand the system I'd built. For 11 years, I had been the architect of the company's automation backbone. Every workflow, every nightly batch cycle, every cloud sync, every deployment pipeline, they all passed through tools I had written. And despite the new CTO's claims that I was outdated and too entrenched in legacy architecture, the simple truth was this: no one else fully understood how anything worked. And they proved it, within an hour. As I reached the far end of the parking lot, I heard the first sirens from the building. Not emergency vehicles, alarms from the internal operations floor. Operations failures have a certain sound: elevated voices, hurried footsteps, the subtle panic of people realizing they're in over their heads. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number, the deployment pipeline is frozen. We can't push hotfixes. What did you do? I didn't reply. I didn't have to. My work laptop had been remotely wiped 5 minutes after I walked off stage. In doing so, they'd erased the one local credential vault containing the authentication keys needed to keep the orchestration clusters running. A vault I had repeatedly asked the company to back up. A vault they kept telling me was unnecessary because we're going to migrate soon. The system wasn't dead. It was simply waiting. Then came another text. Operations lead, all inbound orders are stuck. Fulfillment is at 0%. No one can override. Is this you? Not me. Them. In their arrogance, they had pushed me out in front of half the company without performing a single knowledge transfer session. And by wiping my laptop, they had effectively locked themselves out of the very tools that ran the business. The real punchline? I designed everything to be resilient except one component, the emergency override. It was protected by a rotating token known only to me, and to retrieve it, you needed access to a device they had destroyed. By noon, the CEO himself finally called. He didn't bother with greetings. Can you come back? We need your help. There it was. The sound of pride cracking. I'd love to help, I said. But I no longer work for your company. And as you made clear this morning, access to systems is strictly limited to employees. A long, trembling silence. Then, we'll rehire you. Same title. Same salary. I actually laughed. You publicly fired me for not automating fast enough. Now you need me to save your entire operation. This is not a same salary situation. His voice tightened. What do you want? I didn't want revenge. Not really. I wanted acknowledgement of the work, the years, the expertise they dismissed as replaceable. But I also wanted security. A 2-year contract, I said. Consultant status. Triple my salary. Guaranteed, paid up front for year 1. No public announcement, no one needs to know you begged. And all future architecture decisions go through me. Another stretch of silence. Then, quietly, send the contract. I walked back into the building at 2:17 p.m. Heads turned. 200 people who had watched me get humiliated that morning now watched me return without a badge, without a supervisor, without a care. The difference? This time, they cleared a path. I sat down at the terminal, typed a single command, reinitialized the cluster keys, and watched the system spin back to life. The CEO exhaled like a drowning man breaching the surface. Before I left, I turned to him. Next time, I said, don't fire the person who built the house while you're still living in it. And I walked out, this time not as an employee, not as a victim of a public firing, but as the highest paid person in the company, by a factor of 3. Corporate revenge doesn't always require sabotage. Sometimes, all it takes is letting incompetent people crash the ship they insisted they could steer, and then charging them a premium to fix the holes. I didn't storm out. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I simply walked past the rows of staring faces, some pitying, some amused, most pretending not to enjoy the spectacle, and sat calmly in the empty lobby as if I were waiting for an Uber that I'd called hours ago. The truth was, I wasn't waiting for a ride. I was waiting for the system clock to hit 2 p.m., the moment everything they'd just done would turn spectacularly, catastrophically against them. Continue, sure, they thought firing me in front of 200 employees at the quarterly briefing would send a message. Mark, our COO, made a whole performance out of it, mic in hand, spotlight on him, announcing my unacceptable performance like he was hosting a game show. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Most of them knew the truth. I wasn't just some middle manager. I was the architect of the entire operations platform, logistics routing, payroll batching, vendor negotiation workflows, the customer-facing update engine, all of it. I had built the system, piece by piece, for 10 years. And by firing me without proper transition protocol, they had just yanked out the keystone of their own arch continue. The clock in the lobby ticked to 1:58 p.m. One of the junior analysts, poor kid, peeked around the corner at me. He knew. A handful of them did. They'd seen the memos I sent. They knew about the change management freeze. The one Mark had ignored because he didn't take orders from IT people. I looked at the analyst and asked, "They start the new rollout already?" He swallowed hard. "Yes." Mark pushed it through. "Said you were stalling." I nodded once. Not angrily. Not triumphantly. Just knowingly. "Continue." Right at 2 p.m., the building changed. First came the alert tones, sharp, repeating, layered like an orchestra tuning before a tragic opera. Then came the footsteps on the upper floor. Running. Doors slamming. Voices echoing down the stairwell. Then someone yelled the words I knew were coming: "The system is down." I didn't smile. But I did allow myself the smallest, slow breath of vindication. The new update they'd forced through while firing me wasn't just buggy, it was incompatible with the legacy routing engine. I had scheduled a rollback window for 2 p.m. if the test sandbox didn't match production exactly. And because they fired me mid-update, no one executed the confirmation step. Which meant the system did exactly what it was designed to do in emergency protocol: shut everything down to prevent corrupt data. Warehouses halted. Fleet routing halted. Order processing halted. Customer dashboards froze mid-refresh. Thousands of shipments stalled in digital limbo. "Continue." Mark burst into the lobby, red-faced, drenched in sweat, eyes wide like he'd seen a ghost dribbling spreadsheets. You knew this would happen." I looked up calmly from my chair. "I told you the update required supervision. You need to come fix this." "You fired me," I said evenly. "In front of the entire company." "That was a misunderstanding," he snapped, desperation cracking his voice. "We can undo that." "No," I said. "You can't." He opened and closed his mouth like a fish trying to argue philosophy. The CEO sprinted in seconds later, demanding an explanation, demanding I return, demanding I be reasonable. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't drag it out. I simply stood and delivered the truth they'd never bothered to understand. You don't get to fire the person holding the system together and expect it to run by itself. Silence. Real silence. The kind that meant they finally understood. Conclude: within 48 hours, the board launched an inquiry. Within 72, Mark resigned to pursue other opportunities. The CEO followed a week later. And me? I didn't come back. They offered my job back, at triple pay, with bonuses, with a team of 12 under me, but I declined. The system was still salvageable, but the company wasn't. Instead, I took a contract with one of their competitors, who appreciated the phrase institutional knowledge a little more literally. And as for the company that fired me in front of 200 people, their system is still running on my old architecture. And it still sends me an automated alert every day at 2 p.m. A reminder of the moment they learned what happens when you mistake public humiliation for leadership and underestimate the quiet person who actually keeps your world running.